My name is Karen Blackburn, and I'm the chair of the Commission on Women here in Melrose. Thank you for joining us for our panel series, EmpowerHer. Today, we're joined by Superintendent Adam Deleidi. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Lovely. And so, first question for you. As you move through your first year as our superintendent, how are you learning about the unique needs of our community, our staff, and our students?
Thank you. Good question. So most superintendents coming into a district do an entry plan. And so I put together a pretty robust entry plan, which was really focused around three questions. What people are liking about the district, what people think needs to be improved in the district, and what ideas do they have to improve the district. We had numerous in-person sessions focused on various stakeholders. We also had a digital survey out there for anybody who wanted to just kind of type their responses. And we did a pretty robust analysis through that process. And also I've had numerous in one-on-one meetings with various people, and also I've been in a lot of classrooms.
Well, that sounds like a very thoughtful and comprehensive approach. How engaged were people? A lot of participation?
I found that Melrose as a community is a pretty engaged community. I would say highly engaged.
That's great. Any surprises?
No real surprises. I came in knowing that Melrose was a very passionate and involved community, and I definitely saw that firsthand. I think the community looks at the schools as a really important part of the community, and they value what goes on, and it's really important that they're successful.
I'm Commissioner Allie Goldberg. Superintendent Deleidi, we understand that as part of your first year here in Melrose that you've been having a series of listening sessions with members of the community and staff, and curious to hear from you, what have you learned from these sessions so far, and what feedback have you gotten from people about changes you'd like to implement based on these conversations?
Thank you for that question. So I would say, there's stuff that I heard from the community members and the teachers, staff members, students, parents, caregivers, but also things that I've observed myself. So I will start with kind of what I heard from the community. I think first and foremost, the thing that came out the most was the need for transparent communication about what's going on in our schools. That came out loud and clear through our listening sessions, through our surveys. Ultimately, resources for students was a large outcome of the survey, outcome of the discussions, and I will say I was really heartened to hear that it was a priority of the community to meet the needs of students with special needs. That is something that's near and dear to my heart, and so I was very happy to hear that the community is in the same place with that.
Great, thank you. And related to conversations that have been happening around the community this year, a big issue that continues to crop up is the school district's budget, and would love to hear a little bit more from you about the state of the district's budget and how do we move forward from where we currently are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question. That is certainly the largest issue that we're dealing with right now. To put it simply, if we were to keep everything that we currently have for school year 24-25, we would be faced with a $4.2 million budget opening up the schools next year. So in terms of looking at that, if you looked at teaching positions, that would equate to about 60 teaching positions, which is probably 20% of our staff. Obviously, that's not how we're looking at it. What we have to look at is, first and foremost, we're at this place where we have to look at compliance, meaning we have to be able to abide by federal and state law, special education law, our union contract, class size limitations, things like that. So really, as we're looking at what we can afford to keep, has to be able to put us in a place where we can legally open the doors and safely open the doors. So as we're looking at places where we can change funding, we're really looking at things that are not required to have. Although those things might be things that the community has grown accustomed to having, we may not legally have to have, and that's the way that we're going to be able to look at ameliorating that budget.
And as part of these budget conversations, I know that states get a significant chunk of funding from the federal government, and with the change of administration, there's been a number of revised policies that may or may not take shape, and just curious if you have a take on how that may also impact your planning of, Melrose's budget.
Yeah, I mean, so the budget's based on a few different factors. The largest factor of our budget is a local contribution from the city, so that shouldn't be impacted in any way. We also have what we call Chapter 70 funding, which we have just over 12 million coming into this year. We're anticipating closer to 13 million, so about 12.9 million in Chapter 70 funding from the state, where the funding is in question is around the title grants. Those are federal grants. So we have about $1 million in Title I funding, and we're hoping that we can continue to get that same funding, but we're going to have to wait and see on that one. But luckily, that's not the largest part of our funding.
Great to hear, and I'm sure will help a lot of people at home watching who are hearing conversations go on many levels of government to better understand, our own budgeting here. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Superintendent Deleidi. I'm Elizabeth Reedy with the Melrose Commission on Women. Now, we just talked about the budget, and I'm going to switch gears a bit. How does the district promote female leadership among students, among staff, among the administrators?
So I would say, in terms of leadership, before I even get into that, I would say in looking at making sure that we have equity amongst all of our various groups, I'm a strong believer that what gets measured gets done. Mm-hmm. So first and foremost, we're working on building robust systems for data collection to be able to track who's participating in AP classes, who's participating in extracurricular activities, who's being disciplined and at what rates. And we're looking for various ways to measure disproportionality to ensure that, roughly, we have close to 50% females, close to 50% males, and a smaller percentage of non-binary gender fluid students. And so as we're looking at all those measures, we're tracking, students with disabilities, students of color, students of various ethnic and racial identities, and trying to make sure that using those numbers that we're collecting, that'll tell us if we have systems that are inequitable. The good thing about females in general in the world of education, I think a primary factor in any sort of inequity has to do with representation. And in the education field, we don't struggle with female leadership representation. We have 8 principals, and I believe 5 of them are female, 3 of them are male. We do have a male superintendent, but we have 2 female assistant superintendents as well. So I think as our female students are looking at leadership roles within the district, they're seeing parts of themselves in those roles. So I think that's a big part of it.
That's wonderful to hear. Will this budget shortfall that you discussed with Ali impact any of the tracking that you've been doing to ensure equity amongst our students?
I am hoping that it doesn't. It certainly impacts the capacity of the people doing it. We're certainly going to have to work a lot harder as we're looking at diminished capacity of our leadership next year, diminished roles and additional responsibilities. But with the system that we're building, we're trying to do it so that tracking that data on a regular basis isn't such a heavy lift, that we'll be able to keep up with that data tracking. Now it's really more about, once we have that data, what are we doing about it? And so I'm still new, and the systems are still new, so we're still pulling in things. I mean, right now I would say in terms of discipline, we're seeing disproportionality with our suspensions for our students with special needs, which is a problem, and we have to fix that. And we also see certainly more suspensions for males than females. And we have to work on that as well. But yeah, it's really about the data first. Then once you have the data, now we put plans in to fix it.
What's your goal with this data? What's the purpose of collecting it, and what do you hope to do with it in the future?
So we have lots of different pieces of data, so it sort of depends on what the data is. But if you're looking at discipline data, the goal is to be able to figure out how we meet student needs, so we're not having to implement discipline as much or at a frequent rate. If you're looking at participation in AP classes, if we're seeing that a certain group isn't participating, and maybe there's a difference between, historically there's been gender differences in the STEM AP classes versus the humanities AP classes. So if we have way more females in the humanities, we want to get the other gender, the misrepresented gender, to be able to understand that they're welcome there too. And on the flip side with STEM. And I don't think we have the numbers to see that disparity yet. But as we go through, if we're to find that we have a disproportionate amount of females taking STEM AP classes, then we would be getting together to ultimately meet the goal of increasing those numbers.
Good to hear. What steps is the district taking, what steps are you taking to address bullying, harassment type issues, particularly as it relates to our female students?
Yeah. So state law requires that we have robust systems for dealing with bullying in general. So anytime there's any question of bullying, we get a report and we conduct a full investigation. And on the same token with the previous question, we are tracking bullying data as well. So we're looking for disparities in terms of gender, in terms of race, in terms of students with special needs. And so in general, we're not seeing any, we're seeing certainly more male victims of bullying than female victims of bullying. So in terms of the gender difference with this organization, that's not really coming up as an issue. We treat them all very seriously. And I know it is an issue, right? And I don't want to downplay it, but the numbers suggest that it's not as strong of an issue as people feel. On average, we're getting like 1 to 2 bullying sort of reports per month across the district, which is pretty low, but it doesn't feel low to the victim. I would just want to emphasize that.
Do these reports of bullying occur more so with older children or younger children in the middle school?
I would say there are more reports of bullying at the middle school and the high school than there are at the elementaries, but we have some across the grade levels. And then we also there's bullying reports and then there's positive findings. So we conduct the investigation. It might not be that according to the definition of bullying, we're actually having a finding of bullying. So I would say less than half of the reports of bullying are resulting in findings. And to be clear, that doesn't mean that there's not a problem. Mm-hmm. There's always a problem if somebody's reporting something. And just because it doesn't rise to the level of bullying, it doesn't mean we're not doing anything about it. We can still put in safety plans. But once you have a finding of bullying, then there are other steps that sort of kick in, so it becomes more of a formal process.
Thank you very much for your time.
Hello, I'm Commissioner Barbara Rotker, and I'd like to ask you, Superintendent Deleidi, to speak to families or residents in the city who don't have kids in the system. Tell us a little bit about what you'd like them to know about the schools, how they might contribute, or maybe how they could get involved.
Yeah, great question, thank you. So I would say what I want them to know is that we work really hard to develop knowledgeable and skillful students who will contribute to our community. So we're always looking to see if there are ways to partner with the community to help our students understand that they are part of this community. We do have instances where there are opportunities for people to volunteer and help out. There's an organization called The Bridge where they're always looking for volunteers. They have hundreds of people signing up. If people want to dedicate time and commit to the schools, we have people who volunteer to work in our libraries. We have people who volunteer to come in and just help out, stocking those shelves in the libraries, or a variety of other things that they can possibly do. So if you can reach out to the Bridge or call one of the schools and say like, hey, I live near the Winthrop School and I want to help out, call up that school and just say, what do I do? And they'll point them in the right direction.
Mm-hmm. As a follow-up, what about maybe people who don't have time during the workday but who still want to support the schools in some way? Do you have something you'd like to suggest? At night, I'm not really sure about nighttime. I mean, schools are running in the daytimes, but there certainly could be events that I'm not aware of, and it might be worth asking that question.
All right, thank you so much for joining us today. We have just a couple more questions to go. I'm Commissioner Ariba Zakir, and for any Melrosians, I'll start again. Thank you so much for joining us today. We just have a couple more questions to go. I'm Commissioner Ariba Zakir, and for any Melrosians who have not yet had the chance to meet you, what is something you hope they take away from their first interaction with you?
That's an important question. I like to pride myself on being honest and transparent. So I would hope that as people talk to me, they recognize that while they might not like everything that I have to say, I'm telling you the truth. So that is one piece that's important to me, to know that what I mean what I say, and I say what I mean, and I'm not really trying to hide anything. Another piece perhaps would be that, you know, I'm a dad. I do live in the dreaded neighbor town of Wakefield, so please don't hold that against me. But I do have 2 children. I have a senior and a sophomore, so I'm in the middle of it, just like many parents, and I've also lived through the challenges of, you know, having young children and all that that entails. So I understand how difficult it is to be a caregiver and everything that comes there. So I have lived it, and I do understand.
Thank you so much for sharing, and we definitely get that energy from you, and we don't hold that against you. Everyone is welcome here in Melrose. So speaking of Melrose, what is one of your favorite things about Melrose?
Oh boy. I mean, I would say the people, but I probably won't get away with that answer. So I would say when my children were young, one of our favorite things to do was coming down Main Street when the streets were shut off for the Halloween day, you know, where people are coming in costumes. That was sort of my first interaction with the community in Melrose, and that goes back, you know, about 10, 15 years now. And we did that every year until my kids were kind of too old to do it anymore. So that, I think that's probably my favorite thing that jumps out as a memory from Melrose.
That's great. That's also one of my favorite days, to be out on Main Street. All the kids out getting candy from the different vendors out there. And that brings us to the end of our conversation. Thank you so much for being here with us and answering our questions today.
Thank you for having me.